I'm going to start this off with a trigger warning. There will be controversial material discussed here. Now, when I say controversial material, I do not mean that within Judaism it's controversial, because it's not. It is not debated. There are no discussions that contradict this. There are many sources that back these concepts up in the Torah. When I say controversial, I don't mean within Judaism. I mean within the Western world that many of us were raised in, if you're listening to this podcast. And so therefore, there might be an emotional reaction to some of the things we're going to be discussing. It might sound logical. He's going to lay it out very clearly, intellectually, step by step. Nevertheless, there might still be an emotional reaction to this. And so therefore, it was a bit in jest, the trigger warning. But what I really mean by that is that this should not be your first podcast in this series, What is Judaism? If someone shared this with you because it's controversial material, it would be irresponsible to take this class alone, this podcast alone, out of context of the rest of the course. So if you are interested in this material, please start from number one, build up. There is a build up. There's a whole framework of understanding here. And with that, let's get into this topic, the difference between the Jewish people and the rest of the world.
Looking forward to it.
We're now in section 2, beginning chapter 4, Be'inyan Yisrael v'umas ha'olam, regarding the Jewish people and the nations of the world. Min ha'anyanim ha'amukim sheban ha'gasa yizbarach shemo, hu inyan Yisrael v'umas ha'olam. So among the great, deep concepts in the ways that Hashem runs the world is the idea of the difference between the Jewish people and the other nations of the world. Shemitzad teva ha'anoshi, nira ha'yosim shavim be'emes. From a purely scientific perspective, it seems as if Jews and non-Jews are exactly the same. We're all Homo sapiens. Umitzad inyane ha'torah, heim shonim shinui gadol. But from a Torah perspective, not from the scientific method, but from the traditions that we have of spiritual reality, there is a great difference between the two. V'nivdalim b'minim mischalfim legamre, and they are disparate in fundamental ways. V'hinei ata nevayer be'inyan zeh beur maspik, and so we'll attempt to give a sufficient explanation for what these differences are. Unefaresh masha b'y misdamim zeh lo zeh, we'll explain what are the similarities. Umasha b'y mischalfim zeh mizeh, and in what ways are they different? Number 2, Adam harishan kaidem cheto, haya b'matzav elyon ma'oid mimashahu ha'adam ato. Now the first man, Adam Harishon, we call him, before his original sin, he was in a state of elevation which is much greater than what we see as mankind today. And this is an important point. The way we relate to humanity is fundamentally skewed. The way the human being was created initially was on a much higher level than we could comprehend. And we've already explained this. So it's important to remember that the concept of true humanity, what an actual human is or should be, is unlike anything that we've ever experienced or could conceive of truly.
And that's just because we're at such a low level.
Yes, we're at a low level now, as he'll explain in just one moment. And we have explained this already in section 1, chapter 3. The level that mankind was at before the sin, which is really just Adam. It was a tremendously high, elevated level meant for eternity, as we explained earlier. And had he not sinned, he would have continuously elevated, one step above the next. And in that good state, that state of goodness, he would have had descendants, spiritual and physical descendants, other humans, a set number that Hashem would have decreed, that would have been appropriate for the ultimate completion and perfection of the universe. V'hayu kulim nanim imay batayvahu. And all of these descendants would have benefited from that true goodness of God that he would have been accomplishing through his actions, had he not sinned. V'amnam, ha'toldos ha'ela. Now, these descendants, shahayu roi sheyolid, that would have been created from Adam, nigzuru v'shoyer milfanov yisbarach shemo. They would have been decreed to have a certain structure, and each one on its own level, meaning that there would have been primary ones and secondary ones, sharashim va'anafim, roots and branches, nimshachim ze achar ze, that are drawn one after the next. B'seder miyuchad ki ilonis ba'anfehem, in a very logical structure, much the same that trees are structured. You have a trunk, the root of the tree, and then the branches. Umispar ha'ilonis umispar ha'anafim hakol meshur b'tachlis hadiktuk. The number of trees, so to speak, and the number of branches, they all would have been calculated exactly. V'hinei b'chatoi yorad ma'od mimadrigasai. Now, in man's sin, in Adam's sin, he descended tremendously from that level. V'nichlal min ha'choshech v'achirus shi'ur gadol kamoshe ve'arnu. And he descended into the depths of darkness and became immersed in obscurity, physicality, to a tremendous degree, as we've already explained. Uklal haminho anoishi yorad me madrigasai. And the point is that it wasn't just him. Because he is ultimately the root of all of humanity, he caused that all of humanity and mankind descend in its level also with him. The omad b'madrega shafalam od. And now mankind is at a lower state, sub-humanity. Bilti ru'uya lamala harama hanitzchius shehis ated labarishayna. Without the ability to be on that high level that was intended for it initially. And the only thing that is present and available for humanity is a level which is much lower, respectively, than what was intended. Now, it's in that state that man had descendants. And all of these descendants are now on this lower, degraded state of humanity. Now, nevertheless, even though this is true, mankind, even in its degraded state, is still human, still has that essential form of humanity. That element of humanity which is much higher than what we recognize as humanity now, and that occurred with that downgrade that happened then with the sin. And it wasn't game over. When Adam sinned, there was still a way back. He could still return back to that elevated level. It's just that in practicality, in actuality, man is at a lower level, and that higher level, that intended state of humanity, is only in potential form. Now Hashem presented the opportunity to those descendants, that existed at that time. He gave to them the ability, the capacity of free will to strengthen themselves and to fight, to exert effort, to elevate themselves from that lower status, and to place themselves on a higher level. And Hashem gave them time for this, for that opportunity. In order to facilitate their ability to use that free will, there's a time period. Just like we in our lives have a designated time that we can accomplish what we need to accomplish on a personal level, so too when we zoom out to all of humanity, the human beings as a whole were given a certain amount of time to use their free will to achieve that higher state. Anything that involves effort, human effort, must be limited within time.
And so this is over the course of generations on
Yes.
a human timescale.
Yes. And we'll see there are different kinds of generations, as we'll see now in number 3. V'hinei ra'asa chachma elyono, heyos roi shezeh hayishtadlus yischalek l'sharshi va'anfi. Now Hashem decreed that the way to do this is to split up this time period of effort to reach that higher state, to split it up into roots and branches. Perish, what that means, sheyeh betechilo zman hishtadlus l'sharashim shebatoldos, ve'acher kach la'anofim shebahem. So in the beginning of this time period of effort to reach that level again, will be devoted to people who will be the roots. And then afterwards will be for the people who will be the branches of those roots. We'll explain even more what this means. V'hainu, ki hamin ha'anoishi, kuloi, hoyet tzorech adayin sheyakova inyone karoi, v'yisukan min ha'kilkulim sheniyu bo. The entire human race needs to be established. It needs to be fixed up from those degradations, from the destruction that humanity endured. Ulufi seder hadraga. Now, according to the order of things, it makes sense to first establish the roots, who will be the head, the first and foremost of the descendants of man, who will establish a base level, the foundations of humanity. V'yamdu bo heim va'anfehem. And on top of that, that's where they establish themselves. And their descendants will continue, branch off from whatever they've established as a root. Because branches always extend forth from their respective roots. Now Hashem defined a set time for this period where the root ones will establish themselves. That this, when the time this gate is open, the gate of establishing the roots for humanity, anyone who merits during that time period has the ability to. They have the capacity to achieve this, to prepare themselves appropriately, to establish a good root. Something that is, from there, one would be prepared to reach the higher levels of humanity that is intended. What's intended for mankind to be in that good state. And not the mankind as we know it in its degraded state. In addition to reaching that level on their own, then their job is to produce offspring that will continue along that path, embodying those traits that they've established. Perish, meaning, that those people in that generation, or those generations that are the roots, they will produce offspring who will start from their respective levels. Now, this time period, we have a tradition for when exactly it was, began from the time of Adam Harishon, the first man, up until the generation of the dispersion, meaning the Tower of Babel. V'hinei, kol oisa hazman, loy chodlu tzadikim dorshim ha'emes l'rabim. Now, during that entire time period, there was no lack of righteous people that sought out truth. For example, Chanoch, Mesushelach, Shem, Aver, if you read the Torah, there were righteous people during those times. Umazhirim oisam sheyisaknu atzmam. And they were commanded, they were warned to fix themselves up. They knew the opportunity that was presented to them. V'keven shenismalo sa'asim shel habrius, dahainu bizman haplaga. And once the quote-unquote measure was filled, if you remember from the last episode what that means, that the time period was up, time is up, and now man is judged. Once that happened, at the time of the dispersion, shofat b'midas mishpato yisbarach shemo, Hashem, using his trait of judgment, judged the people. That the time for establishing roots is finished. And that is the end of those things. And all of the traits that are root traits of humanity are now established. They're set in stone. In accordance with everything that has happened from the generation of Adam until the dispersion, based on their actions, the people of those generations now set in stone the traits for their future generations. Va'az hishkiach yisbarach shemoy al kol b'nei ha'adam v'ra kol hamadregos shehayu roi sheyikavu bam ha'anashim hahem kafi ma'aseim. And from that point on, Hashem looked out over all people and saw all of the different levels of spirituality, levels of humanity that would be appropriate to be established in accordance with their actions. Ukava'am bam bebichinasam hasharshios kamosh be'arnu. And Hashem established those traits, embedded those traits permanently. V'hine kafi mashahunchu heim kein nigzar aleihim shiyu moitziim hatalados. And just like those things were established for them, because that was the end of the period, so too any offspring that they produce afterwards will inherit those embedded traits, in accordance with everything that was appropriate for that root that they had established. And now it comes out that we have many different types of people, types of humans, each one in its respective nature. Just like every other type of creature that exists in the world. Frogs behave like frogs and not like birds. And they therefore also produce offspring that exhibit those same traits, just like frogs produce frogs, birds produce birds and not frogs. So too, there are essential differences in humanity, and the descendants of these respective individuals who established these roots will embody those respective traits.
So it sounds like we're not particularly concerned with the differences amongst the other nations. I mean, the chapter title is Israel and the Nations, so it's Israel and all the other, but there are differences even amongst these other nations then.
Right. We haven't spoken about Israel yet. We're just talking about the general concept that inherent traits of humanity do exist respectively among different types of people,
okay,
that are descendants of these respective roots.
And is this spiritual descendancy separate from genetic descendants?
No, they are the same. They go together. Now, all of this is in accordance with divine judgment. That they are fitting to remain in that lower state, that degraded state that had been brought about by Adam Harishon, because of the sin. And they have not elevated beyond that point at all. So at this point, at the point of the establishment of the roots, we had not advanced on a species level to reclaim that higher status. We're just establishing base traits. V'Avraham levado nivchar b'masav v'nis'alo v'nikba liyos ilon me'ula v'yakar. Now, here is where we mention the Jewish people. It was only Abraham, only him, who was chosen as a result of his actions, which is important. This was no arbitrary decision. Avram had chosen this lifestyle of elevation, of connection to God. And it was because of his actions and his free will. He was selected to become elevated, to become the root of a tree which is elevated. That now is compatible with intended humanity, of what Adam Harishon, the first man, was supposed to achieve. And therefore the ability was granted to him to produce offspring that will follow in that path as well, and they will follow his nature. So that was Avram. And from that point, the point of the dispersion, humanity was divided into 70 nations. Each one on its own respective level. But all of them, even though they are different and they have different levels among themselves, all of them are still on that lower state that was caused by Adam Harishon with his sin. The Yisrael b'bechino ha'anoshius be'iluyo, and the Jewish people, who are the descendants of Abraham, who had established that root of elevation, they have now reclaimed this status of man before the sin to some degree.
So how do the other descendants of Avram fit into this? He had other children, Yishmael, Esav. So where do their descendants fit into this if they come from the properly established root?
It's a fair question. He doesn't discuss this here, but the Talmud does say we derive from certain verses in the Torah that those two descendants, really, that he had, which were first Yishmael, who was the son of Abraham, and then Esav, or Esau, who was the son of Isaac, both of them had been cut out of the family spiritually. And so therefore, the only true descendants of Abraham goes through the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob on a spiritual level. So he doesn't discuss that here, but that is part of our tradition. V'hinei acher ha'inyan hazeh nistam shar ha'sharoshim. After this point, the point of the dispersion, the gate of establishing roots was closed and sealed. V'hischil ha'gilgul v'hanhaga ba'anofim kol echad lefi inyanei. And now the period of establishing the branches from those roots commences. V'nimtza sha'af al pi shelach oira nira inyanei ato v'inyan ha'koidmim shave. And even though, by all appearances, it seems as though this time period is no different than what humanity was 3,500 years ago, be'emes eino kach. The truth is, they are very different. Ela ad ha'plaga. Up until the generation of the dispersion, hoya hazman sharshei ha'nishius. Hoya hazman sharshei ha'anoshius. It was the time period of the root of mankind. V'nisgalgu ha'davarim b'bechinazu, and things played out the way they did. Ukashihigia kates zman zeh, and when we've reached the end of that period, nikba ha'davar kafia mishpat, things were set, established, those roots were now set in stone. V'hischil zman acher, in a new period, shehu zman ha'anofim, the period of branches, sha'idenu bay'ata, that we are now currently in. And that's the end of number 3. Now, up until now, we've been speaking purely on a national level, but we'll see that on an individual level, things could still change. Number 4. Umeirov tuva v'chasdo yisbarach shemo, from Hashem's great goodness and chesed and kindness, gazar v'nosan makom afilu la'anfei shar ha'umais. Hashem decreed and gave a place for the branches of other nations, sheb'chirasum u'ma'aseim ya'akru atzma misharsham, that through their free will and their actions can uproot themselves from their respective roots. V'yuchlu ba'anofav shel Avram Avinu alav hashalom im yirtzu, and they can include themselves as branches of the tree of Avram, of Abraham, if they choose so. And this is the idea of conversion. So we see that conversion is not just deciding to adhere to this religion, and it is not just immigration on a political level, that now you become part of the family. It is a literal transformation on a fundamental level of spirituality, that a person abandons their original identity of where they come from spiritually and establishes a new spiritual identity. And this is what is meant when Hashem made Abraham the father of converts. It's not a borrowed term. It's not a euphemism. He literally becomes their father because they jump off of their respective trees and jump onto his tree and become a direct descendant spiritually of Abraham, which is why we refer to converts as Ben or Bat Avram, the son or daughter of Abraham. V'amar lo, and Hashem said to Abraham, V'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpachos ha'adamah, and through you all of the families of the land will be blessed. V'ulam, im lo yishtadlu bazeh. Now, if people don't attempt this, don't try to branch onto his tree, yesharu tachas ilonoseihem hasharshim kefi anyanam hativi, then they will remain on their own tree, branching off of those roots which are on a lower level. Number 5, v'tzarech sheteda, you have to know, shekamos sheklal toldos ha'adam mischalek le'ilonos, sharshim v'anfehem imahim kamos shebe'arnu, that just like the descendants of man were divided into trees, meaning roots and branches, those branches also have divisions. Kain kol ilan ve'ilan bifnei atzmai. Each individual tree, yibachnu boi ha'anafim, ha'rashim, shemehem nimshachim ispartim kol shar hapratim. Each one of those branches has primary branches that from there, smaller twigs, let's say, will come off of. Va'amnam anfe ilanai shall Avram Avinu alav hashalom ha'kailalim hinehem ad shishim ribai. Now the great root of the tree that was begun by Abraham, the main branches that come off of that tree are 600,000. Shehem oisim sheyotzim mitzrayim. These are the 600,000 root souls that left Egypt. Venasis mehem uma hayisraelis, that formed the Jewish nation. V'lehem nechlaka eretz Yisrael, and they are the ones who received the land of Israel, was divided among them. V'chol habayim acharehem, and everyone that comes after them, nichshavim paratim latoldos hakolim ha'ela, are considered just elements of those branches of the 600,000. V'hine la'ela nitna haTorah. Now to these 600,000 were given the Torah. V'oz nikra sha'amad ilon ze'al pirko. And it was at that moment that the tree had, so to speak, reached its maturity. V'ulam. Now, chesed gadol asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu im kol ha'umais. Now there was a great kindness that Hashem did with the rest of the world, that they weren't judged immediately. When the time period of creating the roots was over, that did not doom all of humanity right away. Shetala dinam oid ad zman matan Torah. Their judgment was put on hold until the time of the giving of the Torah. V'hechzir es haTorah al kulam shikablua. Hashem, so to speak, offered the Torah to all of these other nations. V'im hayu mekablim oisa, and had they received the Torah, had they wanted it, adayin haya efshar lehem sheyis alu memadragasam hashafala, they would have had the opportunity to elevate themselves to a higher root and be on the same level as the Jewish nation. V'kevan shaloi ratzu, and since they did not want that, az nigmar dinam lagamre, then their judgment became established forever. V'nistam hashar mipneihem situm she'ein lo pasicho, and there was a seal that opportunity is closed indefinitely.
So the only correct answer was Naaseh v'nishma.
We will do and we will hear. Right, so what you're referring to, if anyone's not familiar, is we have a teaching that before Hashem gave the Torah to the Jewish people, it was quote-unquote offered to the rest of the nations. Now, that doesn't mean that there was a divine revelation like the Jewish people had at Mount Sinai. We would have heard about that, had that been the case, from other nations. What it means is that, at least on some level, on a national level, people had the opportunity to choose goodness at that point. They still had an opportunity to want truth, to want Hashem more than anything else, and what comes with that is the willingness to transform, because that's what would have been required. The Jewish people at that time, right, because you say maybe it's not fair, because the Jewish people at that time were descendants of Abraham. They were primed for this. They were already compatible with the Torah. When these other nations were offered the Torah, they were already incompatible. And so how was it fair to offer them the Torah? And then, of course, they would decline. It doesn't fit with who they are. They're on a lower level. What he's saying is they had the opportunity to want to be on that higher level. And had they accepted it, instead of saying, this doesn't fit with who I am. They could have said, I want to be something else. I want to be a soul that is compatible with this. And had they chosen that, had they wanted that, which would have totally changed them, it would have. And they would have elevated on a national level to the point where they would have achieved the goal of humanity. But they didn't. And now the time is up. Va'ach ze nishar l'chol ish ve'ish min ha'anafim befratehem she'yisgayer ba'atzmai v'yikonis b'bechirasai tachas ilana shel Avram Avinu alav hashalim. But that doesn't mean that the door is closed to individuals. As we mentioned before, people can still convert and become part of the Jewish nation. What he was saying here is that the opportunity at the time of Mount Sinai was that for other nations of the world, entire races, to elevate. And at this point, it is now only available to the Jewish people. Individuals have the opportunity, the ability, if they choose to connect to that. But otherwise, no.
So help me understand something, because I think, to my understanding, we've already established the concept that free will doesn't go infinitely in any direction. So you've got a somewhat narrow band of actual choices you're making with your free will, and a great deal of stuff is basically what you're born into. So when you have a person somewhere else entirely, maybe he's never even encountered a Jew, someone grew up in Sierra Leone, what free will choice does that person have to, potentially become a Jew, to attach to this root?
Fair question. There's really a two-part answer to this question. One possible answer is it's very possible that if they truly desire this, and this is something that they would be willing to do anything to accomplish, Hashem knows the hearts of man. And if someone was truly willing to do whatever it takes to get closer to Hashem, it's very possible that Hashem could open up doors and generate the possibilities necessary for this person to take that path and join the Jewish nation. So that's one possible answer. But the other answer is that it's not necessary. This opportunity does not need to be offered to anyone, because remember, what we're saying now, what we're really learning in this chapter, is that individuals that exist today are not purely individuals. We are offshoots. We are branches of our spiritual ancestors.
So they've already made the decision.
The decision was made already on a national. They are now an offshoot of someone that has already made that decision. Now, it could be in this lifetime. If they choose, they can fundamentally transform. But that's not expected or required. And so therefore, the opportunity to present that opportunity to them is unnecessary.
Okay.
Now, at this point, you might think, what's the point in other humans even existing? Hashem has wiped out most of humanity already. It's happened. There's a precedent for it. See the flood. So once we've already reached a stage where one subsection of humanity has chosen to reclaim the status of the intended goal of mankind, and the rest haven't, and now the opportunity is shut off, why would they still exist? And this next section doesn't directly answer it, but at least tangentially addresses it. Number 6, V'ulam, loy hasa gezeira lahabir sa'uma sa'ela. There is no decree from Hashem that now the rest of the nations should be destroyed, should be eliminated. Aval haisa ha-gezeira she'yisha'aru b'madrego ha'shafala she'zacharnu. Rather, the decree was just that they must remain on that lower level of humanity. This is a level of humanity which really would never have existed had Adam Harishon, the first man, not sinned. And it was Adam, through his sin, that caused the, at least, ability for people to exist in this way. But they still are human. All people are human beings. Even though these other nations are on a lower level. ha'amiti. Hashem still wants that human beings, all human beings, experience the human experience, to a certain degree, at least. V'hainu, meaning, sheyeh lehem neshama ke'ein nishmas b'nei Yisrael, that all human beings have a neshama, have a soul, that is similar to the soul of the Jewish people. V'afapi she'ein madrigas madrigas nishmas Yisrael, even though it's not on the same level, it's not programmed with the same software, or maybe it doesn't have the same hardware, whichever is the correct analogy. Ela shefala mehem harbe, it is much lower. V'yeh lehem mitzvahs, but they still have mitzvahs, they have commandments, they have a way to connect to Hashem. Yiknu behem hatzlach gufis v'nafshiyas gamkein, they have the capacity to achieve success, whether that be physical or spiritual. Kefi masher roi lev'chinasim, anything that's relevant to their state. V'hem mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and these are the commandments of the descendants of Noah, the 7 Noahide commandments, as it's sometimes known as. V'hine mitchilas habriya nizmanu kol hadvarim. Now, this wasn't a Band-Aid, meaning all of this was prepared. This was a contingency that was built into reality from the beginning. It's not as if man sinned and broke the world and then Hashem scrambled and figured out how are we going to deal with this now. It was all planned, liyosem kach, in order to be at least prepared for this eventuality. If it would be that man would sin, which he in fact did, then the opportunity now exists for humans to exist on a certain level, which is not the intended goal, but still experiences humanity to a certain extent. Just like we find all these punishments that are listed in the Torah. Now, that's not the goal, obviously. We're not waiting for doing something wrong and having these punishments. What the Torah means is if someone will do something wrong, there's a contingency for it. There's a way to fix it. There are contingency plans that are built into reality. This is one of them. Number 7. V'ulam, la'olam haba, now in the world to come, loy timatzena umais zulas Yisrael. The only nation that will exist, is the Jewish nation. Ulenefesh chasidu umas ha'olam, yinasin mitzius b'vechina nosefes v'nispachas al Yisrael atzma v'nitpal lahem. So at this point it seems strange because we're reading this and it all theoretically makes sense. But in our experiences, we look out in the world and we see great people that are not Jewish, people doing tremendous things that would seem to be the full expression of humanity.
Right. I mean, the example that comes to mind is Oskar Schindler.
Sure. Yeah, and you're picking someone that benefited Jews, but there could be plenty of other examples, I'm sure, and more examples that we could possibly count of people that have nothing to do with Jews that are doing acts of humanity that are truly great. And so it doesn't seem to add up what we're saying now, that all of these people are subhuman, they lack humanity, and only the Jewish people are capable of goodness. I mean, that's what it seems like we're saying. And yet we see something different in the world. We see that non-Jews can be very great. So the answer is twofold. Number one is that, like we said in the very beginning of this podcast, our understanding of humanity is pathetic.
The concept of humanity.
Yes, of what humans are capable of, what a human being should be. This ideal human level that we're discussing is something that we are not used to seeing. It is maybe not something that we see expressed by the Jewish people, unfortunately, because we are also on a very low level. We're talking about capacity, not what we are accomplishing necessarily. And so even on this, so to speak, downgraded version of humanity, that is still tremendous. It's not to equate other people in the world with animals, God forbid. This humanity that we mentioned earlier, all human beings have a soul. They're capable of tremendous things. It's just that the Jewish people are capable of beyond that. And again, we might not see that in our experience of the world, unfortunately. Although if you look closely, you'll see tremendous things that Jews do, but it's usually not advertised. It's behind the scenes. But what our capacity is beyond our comprehension. So that's part one of the answer. Part two is that righteousness is always rewarded. And so therefore, even if a person might not come from the Jewish people and therefore be included in that collective in Olam Haba, they will still have an existence in Olam Haba, albeit vicariously through the Jewish people. They become ancillary to the Jewish people, and that will be their experience in Olam Haba, kiluvush hanitbal la'adam, like clothing is ancillary to the body. And it's through that way they can accomplish eternity. But as we've spoken about earlier, their hardware just does not give them the capacity to accomplish more than that.
Interesting. Because there's the aspect of justice that we've come back to so many times, and judgment. It's hard to reconcile. I'm gonna go back to the example of Oskar Schindler, who did extraordinary things that most people probably wouldn't be able to bring themselves to do, including, I don't know, I want to say including Jews. I'm sure that they could do it, but most of us don't. And so the idea that some great person like that would be relegated to a lower level is hard to reconcile with the aspect of justice.
We see a very superficial layer of reality. We don't see souls. We see bodies, and we see actions that are enclosed in darkness. And so it is hard to come to terms with this concept. But this is, if we're going to accept the rest of the package, this is what comes with it. This is the tradition of the Torah. Number 8. V'hinei b'shah shenechlak ha'olam kach, sama kodesh baruch hu shivim pekidim misug hamalachi sheyehem hamumunim ala umas ha'ela. Now, at the time that these 70 nations were established, way back in the generation of the dispersion, Hashem appointed 70 angels, types of angels, to be the ministers over each individual nation. Umashkifim aleim umashkichem al inyonehem. And these ministering angels are appointed to look after those nations and take care of them and to interact with them. And Hashem's level of oversight is not directly with the nations of the world, but rather in a general sense of how reality operates. And it is this angel, this ministering angel, that deals with that nation. By the way, another word for this ministering angel could be a god with a lowercase g. Yeah, it sounds weird to say. It sounds blasphemous from a monotheistic perspective, but that is really the concept of what a god with a lowercase g is this power, so to speak, that you interact with that gets you what you need, what you want. And these are the gods of the world. And this is when the Torah instructs us not to have any other gods. It is not saying don't make up fantasy and worship something that you just invented through your fiction. It's saying do not worship the gods, the actual gods that exist in the world that are appointed over spiritual matters.
Interesting.
Because the truth is they have no power of their own, as he'll say right now. They do this, all of the power that these ministering angels or gods, let's say, have, are given to them by Hashem. So just like anything else, just like a frog, it is a creation of Hashem that is only given existence and power through the only true reality, which is Hashem. So this idea that every other nation of the world interacts directly with an angel, and the Jewish people interact directly with Hashem, which is what Avram introduced to the world. with his monotheism was not the idea that there is one infinite source of reality. People knew that. It was the idea that it's not worth dealing with anything else, to have a direct connection to the source of all of reality. And this is what was generated for his descendants. As the prophet Amos says, only you I have known from all of the families of the land. Meaning Hashem deals with us directly. Now we said that Hashem doesn't deal with these nations directly. He doesn't look over them directly. Rather, an angel takes care of it. It does not mean, God forbid, that Hashem doesn't know what's going on. Hashem says, I'm too busy with other things, and so this angel should take care of it. What it means is that Hashem doesn't directly intervene in the affairs of those nations. Hashem creates a system for how reality works. There's nature, there's laws of nature, there's metaphysical laws that govern spirituality, and they operate obviously not independently because it is powered by Hashem, but theoretically, Hashem would see fit to intervene with what would happen, quote unquote, naturally.
Suspending the laws of nature on behalf of the Jewish people, but not the other nations.
Exactly. It's not that Hashem doesn't know what's happening. Everything is revealed to him. But he doesn't directly deal with these other nations. And we'll discuss this concept more later on in the book. Number 9. Now, through the actions of the Jewish people, the entire rectification of the universe, Hashem made it dependent on the actions of the Jewish people, who had reclaimed this status of humanity. Originally, it was supposed to be everyone. But now that the Jews have reclaimed that status, the perfection of the world now rests in the hands of the Jews. And it's as if Hashem has subjugated the way he interacts with the world to the whims of the Jewish people. Now, it's obviously not 100% true. All power comes from Hashem. But Hashem deals with the world the way we choose to. He has given us the reins. He has let us decide. That according to our actions, we will either increase God's presence in the world or hide his presence from the world.
Okay, so that's what it means by subjugating, is just that it's because of our actions specifically. We get to choose how we act, and he's already established that good actions bring my light into the world. Bad actions, God forbid, take it away.
Yes, King David said in Psalms, Hashem tzilcha al yadi menecha. Hashem is the shadow of your right hand, which means that you move your hand and the shadow follows. That Hashem lets us decide what's going to happen in the world. He makes it happen, but he makes it dependent on the direction that we choose. He gives us the keys. And by the way, this is the true justification for anti-Semitism. If something is bad in the world, it is the Jews' fault. It's true. It's 100% true. So this is not, I was going to say this at the end, but I guess it's worth saying now because we brought it up. What do we take away from this whole chapter? That we're better? A sense of elitism?
Well, yeah, I was going to bring this up, but please go ahead.
Not at all. This is no justification for superiority or some complex like that. What it means, the only thing that we really need to take away from this is that we have a tremendous responsibility to the world. And if things go wrong, it's our fault. And we need to make it right.
Yeah.
We need to care for and love the entire world, not to look at other people as subhuman, but to treat people with humanity, to treat animals with respect, to treat plants with respect. It doesn't matter. We are meant to behave like God in the world, and we bear that responsibility. And so we share in profits, we share in losses.
Okay. That's the heart of my question, which is if a person were to take this and, align themselves with it entirely, how do you engage at that point with non-Jews with anything other than pity or disdain. And I think you've, love, really.
Absolutely. Respect and humanity is the way you treat all people. That is the lesson of the Torah. All of this is practically not relevant too much in our lives, at least in terms of how we treat people.
Okay. It's good.
This is the divine path. Right? Treat people with respect and dignity. It's pretty simple. Let's continue. So the Jewish people are the ones that have the reins. We bear the responsibility. The other nations of the world, it looks as if they're affecting things that are happening, but on the deeper levels of reality, they do not possess the hardware or software, whichever. I don't know. Not sure
the metaphysical
which
analogy
choose.
Is tough, yeah.
They don't have the capacity to affect things on a spiritual level. They can affect their own selves on a personal level, on a national level, whether the nation will benefit or have detriment. Im baguf ve'im banefesh, whether it's physical or spiritual. V'yosifu koyach basar shelahem o yachlishuhu, and they could also increase the power of their ministering angel, or to weaken it. But that's the extent. Finally, number 10. Va'amnam, afapi she'ena kadosh baruch hu mashgiach al umas ha'olam befratehem, even though Hashem doesn't look over the other nations on a specific level, it's possible that Hashem will intervene and will look into the matters of the other nations if it has an effect on a Jewish person, either an individual or a collective. And this falls into the category of what we explained at the end of last chapter, which is that there are actions that Hashem takes which are facilitatory. And with that, we close this dense chapter.
Wow. It's a lot. And thank you for going through this. It really reiterates in a powerful way how much responsibility we have. You touched on it. We bear the responsibility for repairing everything, the state of humanity, and no one else can do it. It's pretty extraordinary to think of it in those terms.
Yes. And again, I just want to reiterate and stress that when it comes to the way we view other nations of the world, before you start thinking about how superior you are, why not take a look at your own life? See how well you're doing. We need to be focusing on our responsibility, like you said, and not on our superiority. And in fact, our sages say this is one of the reasons the Jewish nation was chosen, because they were an am ma'at, which literally means a small nation. And our sages derived that they were an am shemamat imas atzmam. They're a nation which smallifies themselves, meaning it's a humble nation. It's really amazing. You find there are other nations of the world, other people are very proud to be who they are. And it's like only the Jews that are embarrassed to be Jewish. And that's it's a good trait to bear that humility. I know that many Jews will hear this chapter and feel very uncomfortable. And to a certain extent, that's good because it's an expression of humility. So hold on to that. But we have to know this is the truth. We have this responsibility.
All right.
Till next time.
Thank you, Rabbi.